Europe, a continent bound by centuries of history, culture, and rivalry, yet today, unified under one of the most ambitious political and economic experiments ever attempted, the European Union. On paper, it's a miracle of cooperation. 447 million citizens, 27 nations, one single market, and the third largest economy on Earth, standing proudly beside the giants, the United States and China. The euro, the symbol of this unity, isn't just a currency. It's a statement of shared destiny. It circulates through 20 member nations, influences billions in global trade, and holds the title of the world's second most powerful reserve currency. But beneath this shining image lies tension, and cracks that are slowly starting to show. Because the truth is, the European Union was never just about money. It was about peace, stability, the belief that nations that trade together, work together, and prosper together would never again wage war against each other. It was born in the ashes of conflict, but now it stands at a crossroads of uncertainty. The dream of unity is being tested. A war on its doorstep, an energy crisis threatening its industries, growing nationalism in member states, and economic gaps so large that the richest EU economy produces 5 times more per citizen than the poorest. The same system that allows goods, labor, and money to flow freely across borders is also draining talent from the east to the west, a modern brain drain within its own walls. Meanwhile, inflation, debt, and demographic decline are forcing the Union to question whether shared strength has turned into shared vulnerability. If the balance tips too far, if faith in the system breaks, the consequences could ripple far beyond Europe. The collapse of the EU wouldn't just shake European politics, it could rewrite the rules of the global economy. So in this video, we'll dive deep into the European Union to uncover how it rose from a divided continent to a global superpower, the hidden fractures threatening its unity, the economic forces pulling it apart from within, and what a future without the EU might look like for the world. Because when 27 nations share one destiny, every decision, every crisis, every imbalance matters. This is the untold story of Europe's grand experiment, and what could happen if it fails. Europe wasn't always a story of unity. For centuries, it was a battlefield of ambition, empire, and ideology. From the ashes of 2 devastating world wars rose a desperate desire, not just for peace but for permanence. Never again would nations like France and Germany risk tearing the continent apart. In 1951, a revolutionary idea took root. Instead of competing over coal and steel, the resources that powered war, countries would share them. The European coal and steel community was born, binding 6 nations through cooperation rather than conquest. It was a modest beginning, but its message was powerful. Interdependence brings peace. Over the next few decades, this vision grew bolder. Economic ties deepened, tariffs disappeared, borders blurred. What began as a single agreement evolved into a greater dream, a united Europe standing together in trade, diplomacy, and identity. Then in 1993, the European Union officially came to life with the signing of the Maastricht Treaty. 12 founding nations pledged to create something the world had never seen before, a continent-wide alliance built on shared citizenship, open markets, and a common currency, the euro. For many, it felt like a new dawn. The Cold War had ended, globalization was accelerating, and the promise of prosperity seemed within reach. From Lisbon to Helsinki, from Dublin to Athens, the future looked bright. The euro became the ultimate symbol of unity, not just a currency, but a belief that Europe could finally act as one. 20 countries adopted it, and its value quickly rose to become the second most traded and trusted currency on Earth. Investors, traders, and nations across the world saw the EU as a force of stability in a chaotic global market. But even in its earliest days, cracks began to form beneath the surface. Some nations prospered faster than others. The economies of Northern and Western Europe surged ahead, while the South and East struggled to keep pace. The dream of a perfectly balanced union was already showing strain. Still, hope persisted. New members joined, drawn by the promise of growth, funding, and access to a massive internal market. For many Eastern European nations, joining the EU meant stepping out of the shadow of communism and into a future of democracy and opportunity. The European Union became more than a political project. It became an identity, a statement of what modern Europe stood for: peace, prosperity, and progress through partnership. But as the world would soon learn, even the strongest alliances can be tested. Because for every shared benefit, there was an invisible cost. And soon the global economy, political tensions, and crises beyond Europe's borders would begin to challenge everything the EU had built. For a time, Europe looked unstoppable. Trade flourished. The euro strengthened. Cities glowed with new investment, from Warsaw to Madrid, from Tallinn to Rome. But beneath the surface, something was brewing, a quiet storm that would shake the very foundation of the European dream. The first tremor came in 2008. The global financial crisis ripped through the world like wildfire, exposing how fragile even the strongest economies could be. The collapse of U.S. banks spread panic across continents, and soon the shockwaves reached Europe. Nations like Greece, Spain, and Italy, already burdened by debt, began to crumble under financial pressure. Unemployment soared, governments borrowed billions just to stay afloat, and the once celebrated Eurozone, built to unify economies, suddenly became a trap. Countries that shared a currency couldn't simply print money or devalue their way out of trouble. They were tied to the same rules, the same central bank, the European Central Bank, ECB, controlled largely by the strongest economies like Germany and France. What had once been a symbol of equality now revealed deep inequality. The North accused the South of mismanagement, the South accused the North of exploitation, and trust, the invisible glue that held the Union together, began to erode. Then came the Greek debt crisis, a drama that captured the world's attention. Greece, drowning in loans, was forced to accept harsh austerity measures dictated by the EU and the International Monetary Fund. Pensions were cut, public jobs vanished, streets filled with protests, and the word solidarity, once sacred in Europe, felt hollow. But the financial crisis wasn't the only test. The migrant crisis of 2015 brought an entirely new kind of challenge: moral, humanitarian, and political. Millions fleeing war in Syria, Libya, and Afghanistan sought refuge in Europe. Some nations opened their doors with compassion. Others shut their borders in fear. Suddenly, the Union that prided itself on unity was deeply divided once again. And as waves of refugees arrived on Europe's shores, another force rose within: populism. Parties across the continent began exploiting anger, blaming Brussels for every crisis, every policy, every failure. The dream of a shared Europe turned into a target for frustration. In Britain, that frustration would explode into a historic decision, one that would change everything. In 2016, the people of the United Kingdom voted to leave the European Union. The world watched in shock as Brexit tore through decades of cooperation and trust. The cracks were now undeniable. Financial instability, political division, cultural friction. Europe had survived wars, yet peace itself was testing its limits. The question now was not how strong the EU could become, but whether it could survive its own growing pains. It began as a whisper. A quiet discontent growing louder with every new rule, every new treaty, every Brussels directive. For decades, the United Kingdom had stood half in, half out of the European dream, skeptical of surrendering too much power, yet unwilling to walk away from the benefits of membership. But by the mid-2010s, something had changed. The financial crash had shaken faith in institutions. Immigration had become the subject of heated debate. And trust, in politicians and experts in the EU itself, had fractured. Then came 2016, the year everything changed. The Brexit referendum was framed as a simple question: should the United Kingdom remain a member of the European Union or leave the European Union? To many, it was about sovereignty, the right to make laws in London, not Brussels. To others, it was about identity, about what it meant to be British in a world growing ever more global. And to some, it was a rebellion, a chance to fight back against a system they felt no longer served them. When the results were announced, history turned a page. 52% voted to leave. The shock reverberated across Europe, a political earthquake that rattled every capital from Paris to Warsaw. The reaction in Brussels was disbelief. How could one of its most powerful, influential members, a founding pillar of modern Europe, simply walk away? But for many in Britain, it was liberation, chance to take back control. Yet as months turned into years, the dream of freedom collided with the complexity of reality. Negotiations dragged on endlessly. Trade deals, customs borders, immigration policies. Everything once seamless became tangled in red tape. Businesses struggled, markets wavered, families divided, and perhaps most painfully, Northern Ireland, with its fragile peace band, became the flashpoint. The question of where to draw a border, on land or in the sea, reopened old wounds. For the first time in decades, peace itself seemed at risk. Meanwhile, in Europe, Brexit ignited fear and reflection. If Britain could leave, could others follow? Populist leaders across the continent began to echo the same cries. Our country first. Our rules, our future. But instead of collapsing, the EU doubled down. For the remaining 27 nations, Brexit became a warning, a lesson in the cost of division. New alliances formed, new trade routes opened, and the Union, though scarred, endured. Brexit didn't destroy the EU, but it shattered an illusion. The illusion that unity was inevitable. It reminded Europe, and the world, that even the strongest partnerships can fracture under pressure. And as Britain charted its uncertain course alone, Europe faced a haunting question of its own. Could unity survive in a continent built on difference? Power in Europe has always been a delicate balance. 27 nations, 27 voices, each with its own history, pride, and vision for the future. And yet within this chorus, a few voices always echo louder than the rest. At the heart of it all stands Germany, the economic engine of the continent. Strong, disciplined, efficient. Its industries drive European exports, and its policies often shape the Union's path. Beside it, France, the political heart of Europe, passionate, visionary, and determined to protect the ideals that gave birth to the EU in the first place. Together, they form the Franco-German axis, the power couple that has steered Europe through crisis after crisis. But not everyone is comfortable with their dominance. To the east, nations like Poland and Hungary have grown wary of Brussels' influence. They argue that the EU's push for liberal values, on media, migration, and the rule of law, infringes on their sovereignty. What began as unity is now shadowed by tension. Inside the European Parliament, debates grow fierce. Should integration go deeper, building a United States of Europe? Or should nations reclaim control, keeping Brussels at arm's length? The battle lines are drawn between federalists and nationalists, and neither side is backing down. Meanwhile, in the background, Russia and China watch closely. Moscow tests Europe's resolve through cyber attacks, propaganda, and gas diplomacy. Beijing invests billions through its Belt and Road Initiative, buying influence port by port, country by country. Europe, once the world's center of power, now finds itself surrounded. The European Union was born from ashes, a promise that war would never again define the continent. From the ruins of the Second World War came a bold idea, that nations once divided by blood could be united by trade, peace, and shared destiny. For decades, that dream seemed unstoppable. Borders softened, economies merged, and generations grew up believing that unity was Europe's greatest achievement. But dreams are fragile, and today the European dream stands at a crossroads. In the wake of Brexit, financial turmoil, and political division, Europe faces questions it can no longer ignore. How much sovereignty are nations willing to share? How far can integration go before identity begins to fade? And what does European unity truly mean in a world of shifting power and rising nationalism? The next generation of Europeans sees things differently. They were born into a connected world, one of instant communication, global markets, and digital borders. To them, the EU isn't just a political project. It's a lifestyle, a symbol of freedom and a shield against chaos. But even they see the cracks, rising living costs, unequal opportunities, and the slow pace of reform. Meanwhile, beyond Europe's borders, the challenges grow larger. Climate change demands collective action. Technological revolutions challenge privacy and labor. Conflicts on Europe's doorstep, from Ukraine to the Middle East, test its ability to stand firm. In Brussels, leaders debate policies and treaties. But in the streets of Paris, Warsaw, and Athens, people debate something far more personal. Does the European Union still represent them? Some say the EU must transform, becoming more democratic, more accountable, more responsive. Others believe it must protect its core, remain a beacon of stability in a chaotic world. And then there are those who see a new era emerging, a Europe not just of governments, but of people, ideas, and shared purpose. For all its flaws, the EU remains one of humanity's most ambitious experiments. 27 nations, speaking different languages, carrying different histories, working together toward peace and prosperity. It's imperfect, it's messy, it's slow, but it's still standing. Perhaps that's the real miracle. Not that Europe is united, but that it continues to try. Because in a world defined by division, every act of cooperation is an act of defiance. The European dream isn't over. It's being rewritten, every day, by the people who believe that even in disagreement, unity is worth fighting for. And maybe that's what makes Europe truly powerful. Not its money, not its armies, but its belief that peace is possible, and that the dream, though tested, still lives on.